I am Anya Vance. I'm 38 years old and I track financial fraud for a living. I find the money people try to hide. I follow it through shell companies, offshore accounts, falsified ledgers, and I don't stop until I have something a federal prosecutor can use in court. I'm good at it. Exceptionally good. Which is why it was almost funny when the biggest case of my career turned out to be my own mother. Almost. I grew up in Beacon Hill, Boston. Not the tourist version, the real one. The streets where families have held the same properties since the 1880s, where your net worth is common knowledge among neighbors, and where who you marry is considered a reflection of the family's standing in a way that people outside that world find difficult to fully understand. My mother, Victoria Hartwell Vance, understood that world completely. She had married into it at 24 and spent the next 4 decades maintaining it with the precision of someone who knew exactly what she had and exactly what it cost to keep it. The Vance Family Legacy Trust was worth north of $40 million at its peak. 3 generations of Boston real estate, private equity, old money carefully managed and never discussed openly. My mother was its steward. My father, Arthur, quiet, gentle, happiest in his study with his maps and his historical documents, was its nominal head. Everyone who knew them understood what that meant. I was their oldest daughter. My sister Blair came 3 years later. Blair learned early that approval in our household required alignment, reflecting back what my mother needed to see, confirming her judgments, never becoming inconvenient. I was inconvenient from the beginning. I went to Wellesley. Double major in math and economics. MIT for my master's in quantitative finance. At 24 I joined a forensics firm in Cambridge and discovered I had a specific, unusual talent. I could read financial deception the way my father read historical documents. Patiently, without judgment, right up until judgment was required. My mother found all of this acceptable. The Vance family valued financial competence. It fit the narrative she had built. Dr. Julian Sterling did not fit the narrative. I met him in February 2014, at a hospital benefit I'd been pulled into at the last minute. He was a neurosurgery resident at Brigham and Women's, 31, 6'2", with the particular calm of someone who had trained himself not to show strain. We talked for 4 hours. He called the next morning. By October I knew I was going to marry him. I told my mother in November. We were in the front parlor of the Lewisburg Square townhouse. The dark walnut paneling. The oil portraits of Vance ancestors. My mother in her high-backed Chippendale chair, the one she'd occupied since I could remember, as though the room arranged itself around her. Blair was there too, which I hadn't anticipated. I described Julian honestly. His work, his research in medical AI, his character. I said I was in love with him. My mother's face made small, careful adjustments while I spoke. When I finished she asked, "Is he from Boston?" "Atlanta." "His family is from Georgia." "The Sterling family." "I don't recognize the name." "His father is a surgeon. His mother taught high school biology for 30 years. She set her wine glass down on its coaster with precise, controlled movement. "Anya," she said. "You understand what the Vance name means in this city. There are standards. Not because of cruelty. Because of legacy." Blair said, quietly, from the settee, "She means he's black, Anya." The word sat in the air. My mother did not correct her. She looked at the fireplace. I stood up. "His name is Dr. Julian Sterling," I said. He completed his neurosurgical residency with the highest evaluation scores in his cohort. His research on AI-assisted intracranial surgery was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. He is brilliant and he is kind, and I am going to marry him. My mother turned her eyes to me. Not anger, exactly. Something older. "If you do this," she said, "not a single dollar of the Vance inheritance will ever touch your hands." I said, "I know." And I left. Julian and I married in April 2015. 31 people. My father did not attend. Blair sent a card with no return address. You've made your choice. 3 cousins disappeared from my life quietly within the year. The absence was a wound. I won't pretend otherwise. But Julian was the least empty room I had ever been in. In November 2015, we incorporated Vance Sterling Forensic Analytics from the second bedroom of our Cambridge apartment. 2 clients. 2 laptops. A heated debate about whether we could afford a 4th database subscription. By 2019, we had 19 staff and had wrapped our first federal referral, a Connecticut private equity case that recovered $34 million for the IRS. Julian had been appointed Director of Neurosurgical AI Research at Massachusetts General, a position written for him because no one else in New England was doing what he did at his level. I wrote to my father throughout those years. Not my mother, there was no point. But Arthur. I wrote about our work, about Julian's research, about what we were building. I didn't ask for anything. Every letter came back. Sealed with fresh tape. My mother's handwriting in red ink, returned to sender. I kept every one. I scanned them and stored them on a small matte black encrypted drive Julian had labeled as a half-joke birthday gift. He called it the Black Box Ledger. The name stuck. Over the years the drive grew. Not just returned letters. Before my access was revoked 9 years ago, I had quietly backed up the Vance Family Legacy Trust's complete historical transaction logs, 7 years of distributions, capital gains records, beneficiary correspondence. Basic forensic instinct. I told myself I'd probably never open those files. I was wrong about that. March 3, 2024. My senior analyst Priya knocked on my office door at 7:14 in the morning and set a file on my desk with the look she gets when something routine has become significant overnight. The Meridian Capital referral, she said. We have a problem. Meridian Capital Partners was a Boston hedge fund referred to us by the SEC's regional office. Standard engagement, performance reporting anomalies. We'd had it 6 weeks. Nothing had risen to criminal referral level yet. I looked at the file. Meridian's largest single investor, 31% of total fund assets, was listed as a Boston-based private family trust. The Vance Family Legacy Trust. The Vance Family Legacy Trust. I set the report down. Picked it up again. Read the name a second time. Priya watched me with professional neutrality. Do you need to recuse? She asked. No, I said. Pull everything. Transaction level detail, 5 years back. Capital contributions, distribution records, third-party redemptions. I want to know who authorized every movement. She left. I sat with my cold coffee and looked at the Charles River, still gray with early March ice breaking at the edges. Then I opened the black box ledger. The historical trust data from 9 years ago loaded clean. I started comparing it against the current Meridian extractions. Within 4 hours I had the first thread. By the following Friday, I had pulled it into a pattern. By mid-April I had what I would later describe to federal prosecutors as one of the most straightforward, and most brazen, embezzlement cases I had seen in 15 years of practice. Over 5 years, approximately $8.3 million had been extracted from the Vance Family Legacy Trust through 3 shell entities, 2 registered in Delaware, 1 in Nevada. The transfers were timed to coincide with legitimate investment redemptions, disguised as management fees and advisory retainers, routed through accounts whose authorization structures had been quietly restructured in 2018. The primary beneficiaries, once I traced the Delaware entities to their registered owners. Victoria Hartwell Vance. Blair Elise Vance. My mother and my sister had spent 5 years systematically stealing from the family fortune my mother had spent 40 years claiming to protect. I sat with that for a long time. Not the fact of it, I had seen worse, done for less. What I sat with was something quieter. Something about the words she had said to me 9 years ago. Not a single dollar of the Vance inheritance will ever touch your hands. She had said that as though she was protecting something. She had been the one stealing it. I picked up the phone and called our outside counsel. I have something, I said. Schedule the referral to the U.S. Attorney's office. He was quiet a moment. Then, Anya. Your family. Schedule it, I said. 3 days later, my phone rang. Unknown number. 18 seconds of voicemail. Asterisk, Anya. It's your mother. I think it's time we sat down. I'll come to your office. Thursday at 10. Asterisk. I played it twice. Saved it to the black box ledger. Then I called Julian. She's coming, I said. He was quiet a moment. In the background, keyboards, distant voices, the ambient sound of serious work being done. How do you feel? He asked. I thought about it honestly. Like someone who's been doing the math for 9 years, I said, and just finished. I'll make sure I'm available Thursday, he said. I looked out at the river. The March ice was breaking apart, moving slowly, catching what little light the day had to offer. Thursday was 3 days away. The black box ledger was in my desk drawer. And my mother had no idea what was waiting for her on the other side of that meeting. Thursday morning arrived gray and cold. A last gasp of winter kind of day, the sky the color of old concrete, thin rain starting around 8 that was still falling when my car pulled into the parking structure beneath our seaport building at 8:47. I had not slept well. That surprised me. I had testified before federal grand juries. I had presented evidence to SEC enforcement panels where opposing counsel billed $400 a minute and considered intimidation a legitimate professional strategy. I had sat across from men who had stolen from pension funds and hospital foundations, and I had not flinched once. But at 2:17 in the morning I had been sitting at my kitchen table with cold tea in front of me, unable to make my mind quiet. Julian found me there at 2:40. He didn't say anything immediately. He just sat across from me, with that particular quality of presence I had learned over 9 years of marriage was its own language. He poured himself a glass of water. He looked at the cold tea. He looked at me. Tell me what's actually happening, he said. I could have given him the professional version. The strategic considerations, the federal timeline, the meeting structure. I had that version ready. Instead I said, I keep thinking about the letters. He nodded slowly. The ones that came back, I said. I know exactly what Thursday is going to look like. I've run it 40 times in my head, and every version ends the same way. But I keep sitting here thinking about those envelopes. The tape she put over the seal. The red ink. Julian set his water glass down. She made a choice every single time. That was not one decision made 9 years ago. That was a decision made again, every time a letter arrived for 9 years. She chose it repeatedly. I know that. Do you? Because the way you're sitting right now looks like someone still trying to understand how a person does that. He paused. I think what's actually keeping you up is something different. You're not nervous about tomorrow. You're grieving. There's a difference. The kitchen was completely still. The kind of quiet that makes you honest whether you want to be or not. She's going to walk in there, I said, and act like 9 years is something we can step over. Like the only thing that matters is what she needs right now. I paused. And the worst part is, part of me is still going to want her to be my mother. Even tomorrow. Even after everything. Julian reached across the table and put his hand over mine. That part of you, he said, is not a weakness. Don't let her use it like one. We sat together until almost 4 in the morning. At some point he made fresh tea. At some point I stopped thinking about the letters and started thinking about the meeting the way I thought about all my important professional moments, structurally, sequentially, with the part of my mind that had never needed to be personal. By the time I went back to bed, I had a plan. I dressed deliberately that morning. Not to impress. To occupy space. Black wool trousers. The charcoal silk blouse. The vintage Jaeger-LeCoultre watch Julian gave me on our 5th anniversary, understated, precise, the kind of object that communicated exactly what it was to anyone who knew, and nothing at all to anyone who didn't. Hair pulled back cleanly. No jewelry beyond the watch. The effect I was going for was not authority. I didn't need to perform authority in my own building. I was going for stillness. The particular stillness of someone who has already decided. Priya was waiting when I stepped off the elevator. She handed me a folder without preamble. Updated extraction complete, she said. The third layer accounts resolved to 2 personal accounts, one at Fidelity, one at a private bank in Zurich. Both registered in Victoria Vance's name. I stopped walking. Zurich, I said. Opened in 2020. 14 wire transfers totaling approximately $2.1 million since opening. A domestic embezzlement case with an offshore component was a categorically different federal matter. The Zurich account added potential wire fraud and international money laundering to the existing charges. The sentencing implications were substantially more serious. Does the referral office know about Zurich yet? Waiting for your sign-off. Hold it until after the meeting, I said. I went to my office and closed the door. The black box ledger sat in my top drawer. I had transferred the relevant files to an encrypted partition on my laptop the night before, organized, indexed, time-stamped. Everything exactly where it needed to be. At 9:52, Marcus called through the intercom. Ms. Vance. Your 10 o'clock is in the lobby. Send her up in 5 minutes. I used those 5 minutes to sit very still with my hands flat on the desk in front of me. Not a technique. Not a method. Just breathing. Reminding myself of what I knew, what she didn't know, and what the distance between those two things meant. She looked older. I registered that before anything else, not with cruelty, just with accuracy, the way I registered data. She was 67 now. The silver hair still precise, the chignon still exact. The beige Loro Piana coat immaculate. But the architecture of her face was carrying more weight than I remembered. The skin around her eyes had the quality of someone who had not been sleeping. The set of her jaw was familiar, but it was working harder than it used to. She walked into my conference room the way she walked into every room, as though her arrival had been anticipated, as though the space had arranged itself for her. She swept the room with one quick glance. The floor-to-ceiling glass. The Charles River behind it in the rain. The long table. Then she looked at me. I stood. Not as deference. Simply because I was not having this conversation sitting down. Mother, I said. Anya. She moved to the chair across from mine with one fluid motion, set her Bottega Veneta clutch on the table, folded her hands. You look well. Thank you. She glanced at the view. The river, the rain. You've built something impressive here, she said. An acknowledgment offered as a concession. We both knew what it was. We have, I said. Julian and I. The name landed. I watched it land. Her shoulders made one small, involuntary adjustment, barely perceptible. A person who didn't know her would have missed it entirely. I'd like to talk about the family, she said. I imagine you would. There are some financial pressures. Temporary ones. The trust has experienced some investment volatility, creating a short-term liquidity constraint. Every word chosen, every implication stripped away. I need to discuss a bridge arrangement. A loan between family members. 1.5 million. Structured formally, documentation, repayment terms. A brief pause. This is not a request made lightly. The room was very quiet. The rain tapped against the glass in a soft, irregular rhythm. I looked at her for a moment. Then I said, "How did you find us?" She blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "VSFA. Our firm." "You didn't call the main line. You called my direct cell. How did you get that number?" A pause, shorter than a second. But I caught it. "Blair made some inquiries," she said. "Blair made inquiries," I repeated. "Into a financial forensics firm. In connection with a trust that has been referred to the SEC's Boston regional office." The first real crack appeared. Not in her expression, not yet. In the stillness. The particular quality of a person who has just understood that the room they are standing in is not the room they believed it to be. "I'm not certain what you mean," she said carefully. "I think you are." I reached forward and turned my laptop screen to face her. She looked at it. I watched her look at it. The moment she understood what she was seeing took approximately 2 seconds. I counted them. The screen did not show a bank wire confirmation. It did not show a loan agreement template. It showed a financial transaction ledger, organized, annotated, time-stamped, color-coded by entity. Each line an extraction. Each entry a transfer moving through 3 shell companies toward 2 accounts, one domestic and one in Zurich, both registered in her name. 5 years of documented theft from the Vance family legacy trust. Displayed on a laptop screen in her daughter's conference room. With the rain coming down outside and the Charles River moving below, and the rest of the building going quietly about its business 23 floors beneath us. Victoria's composure did not shatter all at once. She was far too controlled for that. What happened was more total and more precise. The elaborate architecture she had maintained for 67 years simply stopped working. Not dramatically. In sequence. Floor by floor, like a building losing power from the top down. She looked at the screen. She looked at her hands. She looked at me. "Anya," she started. "You came here," I said, "and asked me for $1.5 million to save your name." My voice was completely level. "What you didn't account for is that my firm is the one that found your fraud. These are not volatility reports, Mother. These are 5 years of extraction from the Vance family legacy trust, traced through 3 shell entities to 2 accounts, one at Fidelity, one in Zurich, both in your name. And Blair's." She was absolutely still. "The SEC referral is already filed," I said. "The supplemental, the one that includes the Zurich component, goes to the U.S. Attorney's Office this afternoon." The rain against the glass. Nothing else. Victoria looked at the screen for a long moment. Then at her hands again, the same hands that had sealed those envelopes for 9 years. Press tape over them. Written return to sender in red ink, over and over, and dropped them back in the mail. When she looked up, the woman who had walked into this room was not quite the woman looking back at me. "What do you want?" she said. It was the first honest thing she had said since she arrived. I picked up the handwritten demand note she had placed on the table. Held it for a moment. Set it back in front of her. "Take that home with you," I said. "And understand something clearly. You did not come here today because you wanted your daughter back. You came because you needed something. Those are not the same thing. They have never been the same thing." She said nothing. "My assistant will show you out." I walked to the conference room door and opened it. Marcus was there, as I had arranged, at precisely this time, and he walked my mother back through the office, past the analysts at their screens, past the federal commendations on the walls, to the elevator. At the threshold she stopped. Didn't turn fully. Just enough. "Your father," she said. Her voice had changed, something in it fractured, a hairline crack in something very old. "He asks about you." I looked at her back. "I know," I said. She left. I stood at the window for a long time after that, watching the rain, and the river, and the city below continuing its ordinary Thursday business. 14 words after 9 years of silence. He asks about you. I picked up the phone. Send the supplemental to the U.S. attorney, I said. Everything. Including Zurich. Copy, Priya said. I hung up. I opened the black box ledger on my laptop and added one line to the file log. Asterisk April 18, 2024. 10:47 a.m. Subject entered. Subject exited. No agreement reached. Supplemental filed. File remains open, asterisk. I closed the laptop. Outside, the rain was starting to clear. The drive sat in my desk drawer for 3 days after my mother left. I knew what was on it. Every file, every folder, every timestamp. I had built that archive with the same methodical precision I applied to every case, nothing random, nothing careless, everything indexed and retrievable. I knew the contents of the black box ledger the way a surgeon knows the anatomy of a procedure before the first incision. Or I thought I did. The folder I had never opened was labeled Hold, Review Later. I had created it in the first weeks after leaving Louisburg Square, when I was still in the building with system access, still copying files with the automatic instinct of someone who understood that documentation was the only thing that couldn't be taken from you. I had filed 11 documents into that folder and then, at some point in the 3rd year after the disownment, I had made a quiet decision not to open it again. Not because I forgot. Because there are things you know exist that you are not ready to look at. The ledger was evidence. Professional. Clean. The Hold folder was something else entirely. On the 4th day after my mother's visit, I opened it. 8 files were what I expected: estate planning memos, a 2014 trust amendment, routine documents I had saved without examining closely. Standard archival material. The 9th file was labeled AV Scan 001.jpg. I opened it. A photograph of a handwritten letter. My father's handwriting, I recognized it immediately. The careful, slightly cramped cursive of a man who had learned penmanship with ruler and repetition. Dated March 14, 2016. 1 year after Julian and I were married. My dear Anya. Asterisk I find I am unable to send this. I have written it 4 times now and each time I reach the same conclusion, that sending it would create consequences I am not able to manage. Your mother reads everything that comes in and out of this house she considers her domain. If I post it from outside she will find a way to know. She has resources and she has conviction and she has, I think, a genuine belief that what she is doing is right. I have never known how to argue with genuine belief, asterisk. Asterisk I want you to know that I think about you every day. I have heard things, through channels I won't describe, about the work you are doing, and I am proud of you in a way I have no mechanism for expressing. I want you to know that the man you married, I have read about his work. I have found his published research and read it carefully, and I understand perhaps 1/3 of it but enough to know that he is serious and brilliant, and that you chose well, asterisk. Asterisk I cannot send this letter. But I am writing it anyway. I think that has to count for something, even if only to me, asterisk. Asterisk I love you, Anya. I am sorry that I have not found a way to make that mean something it could act on, asterisk. Your father. I sat very still at my desk. The office was silent, everyone had gone home, the building dropped to its nighttime register. Outside the window the city moved in its ordinary way, indifferent to the fact that I was sitting here reading a letter my father had written 8 years ago and never sent. I read it 3 more times. Asterisk I cannot send this letter. But I am writing it anyway, asterisk. He had written it. Scanned it. And placed it somewhere I could find it, in the family document system, in the 48 hours before my access was revoked, when he had known what I was doing and said nothing. Had let me copy what I needed and then, quietly, added 1 file of his own. The only channel available to him. I thought about what that meant. About a man who loved his daughter and could not fight for her. who wrote letters he couldn't mail and found sideways methods to deliver them and spent years, apparently, reading his son-in-law's published neurosurgical research in whatever quiet hours Victoria didn't monitor. I had spent years being angry at Arthur Vance for his silence. The anger was not entirely gone. But sitting here at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night with his letter on my screen, what I felt most was not anger. Something closer to sorrow. And underneath the sorrow, the early shape of something else. I created a new folder on the ledger. Labeled it the only thing that felt accurate. Evidence that he tried. Julian called the following morning at 7:48, before I had left for the office. I need to tell you something. His voice had the careful, measured quality he used when he was managing two registers simultaneously, clinical and personal. I received a formal surgical consultation request yesterday through the MGH intake system. I set down my coffee. Arthur Vance, I said. A pause. His primary care physician submitted a transfer of care request. Paulson at Beth Israel has officially referred the case to MGH neurosurgery. It came to our department because of brainstem involvement. He paused again. It came to me specifically because I'm the department lead on posterior fossa decompression cases with complex presentations. I was quiet. Anya. I need to know you understand what I'm about to say. Tell me. I am going to accept this consultation. Not because of our situation. Not as any kind of gesture or statement. Because he is a 69-year-old man with a Chiari malformation and progressive brainstem compression, who has been mismanaged for an indeterminate period, and who needs the best possible surgical evaluation available. That is the only reason. I know that, Julian. I need to hear you say you're not conflicted. I thought about Arthur. The maps on his study walls. The way he handed me a box the morning I came to collect my things, his hand briefly on my shoulder, then stepping back. Not fighting for me. Choosing the arrangement of his life over his daughter. He had not fought for me. He had also, apparently, been reading Julian's research for 9 years. I'm not conflicted, I said. Take the consultation. Okay, Julian said. Then, after a moment, go in at a reasonable hour today. You look tired. You can't see me. I know you. He hung up. I stood in the kitchen holding my phone, looking at nothing in particular, thinking about the geometry of what we were now inside. My father's surgeon was the man my mother had called a stain on the family legacy. The woman who had stolen $8 million from her own trust was weeks away from a federal target letter. And the daughter she had thrown out 9 years ago was the forensic analyst whose evidence was driving all of it. I thought about the word inevitable. The revenge methods I had been most skeptical of in my professional life were the ones that felt designed, constructed, engineered, deliberate. The cases that held up in court and in life were the ones where the truth had simply accumulated until it could no longer be contained. Where the record had been kept and the documentation had been preserved, and the moment eventually arrived when all of it became impossible to ignore. I had not planned any of this. I had just kept the ledger. The second week of May, 2 things arrived within 18 hours of each other. The first came from the U.S. Attorney's Office at 9:14 on a Tuesday morning. The Meridian Capital case had been referred to the grand jury. This meant the investigation had cleared the threshold from preliminary inquiry to active criminal proceeding. Within weeks, Victoria and Blair would receive target letters, formal federal notification that they were subjects of a grand jury investigation. Not charges. Not an arrest. But the moment when the process stops being something happening in the background and becomes something that requires a response. I read the notification twice, forwarded it to outside counsel, and sat at my desk for a few minutes doing nothing. Not celebrating. Not performing either triumph or regret. Just sitting with the fact of it. The referral I had filed. The Zurich transfers I had documented. 5 years of extraction now formally in the hands of a grand jury. The second development came at 3:47 the following morning. My phone rang with an unknown number. I answered because I always answered unknown numbers after midnight. In my work, late calls from unfamiliar numbers were rarely nothing. The voice was thin and slightly effortful. The voice of a man managing some physical difficulty. But the cadence was immediately recognizable, the careful diction, the measured pace, the particular quality of someone who thought before opening his mouth. Anya, my father said. I hope it's not too late to call. I got up quietly, walked to the kitchen, sat at the same table where Julian and I had talked 3 weeks ago. It's not too late, I said. A pause. I heard him breathing, that slight effortfulness I now knew to listen for. I've been trying to find a way to do this for a long time, he said. The right moment kept not arriving. I've come to think that may have been an excuse. It may have been, I said. I saw Julian yesterday. At the hospital. A pause. Arthur stopped. Started again. He's a very serious man. I could see that in about 4 minutes. Something tightened in my throat without warning. Yes, I said. He is. I wanted you to know that I see it. Another pause, longer. I should have seen it 9 years ago. I should have said so then. I don't have a defense for what I didn't do. I have an explanation, which is not the same thing. You can offer it, I said. I'm not going anywhere. He was quiet for a moment. Your mother is a force, he said. You've always known that. What you perhaps don't fully know is what it means to live alongside that force for 43 years. I don't say that to excuse anything. I say it because I want you to understand that my silence was not indifference. A pause. It was a failure of courage. That is the accurate description. I was not indifferent. I was a coward. And I am sorry. The kitchen was very quiet. I know about the letter, I said. The one you couldn't send. I have the scan. I've had it for 9 years. A long silence. I wondered if you'd find that, he said finally. I was never certain. I found it 4 days ago. I'd had it the whole time without opening it. Why 4 days ago? Because I needed to understand your silence before I could decide what to do with it. He absorbed that. And what have you decided? I looked at the window. The city outside dark and still. That you tried, I said. In the ways that were available to you. That doesn't fix everything. But it's not nothing. I heard him exhale, long and careful. I need surgery, he said. I know. Your husband is the surgeon. I know that too. Is that difficult? For you? It doesn't disappear in a phone call. Nothing that accumulates over 9 years disappears in a single conversation. But something had shifted, not completely, not cleanly, but in the specific way things shift when a long-held pressure finally releases and the air around it moves again. Julian was awake when I came back to bed. He looked at me. My father called, I said. He nodded once. Put his arm around me. Didn't ask anything else. I lay there in the dark and thought about the surgery coming. The grand jury moving. Victoria and Blair and what the next weeks would bring. Arthur and his maps and the letter he had found a sideways way to deliver 9 years ago. The black box ledger in my office drawer. Everything it contained. Everything it had always been, not a weapon, not a plan. Just a record. Evidence that things had happened, choices had been made, time had passed, and nothing had been forgotten. The record always exists. I closed my eyes. Blair called on a Wednesday. I knew before I answered what it was about. The target letters had gone out Tuesday morning, formal federal notification that you are the subject of a grand jury investigation, that anything you say can be used against you, retain counsel immediately. 2 pages. Plain language. The kind of document that closes a door somewhere deep inside a building you thought you owned. Blair waited 18 hours to call. The Blair I grew up with would have called within the hour, controlled panic, calculated charm. 18 hours meant she'd either spoken to an attorney, or spent 18 hours searching for an angle that didn't exist. I answered on the third ring. Anya. The charm was completely gone. Underneath was something quieter and more real, the voice of a 35-year-old woman, who had spent her entire life inside a structure that had just collapsed. Blair. I got a letter. From the federal government. I know. Did you know it was coming when we spoke last month? Yes. Silence. You could have warned me. Not anger. Exhaustion. No. I couldn't have. You understand why. A pause. Then, Mother doesn't know I'm calling you. That surprised me more than anything else. I had assumed Victoria had orchestrated this, handed Blair the phone with instructions the way she always handled situations requiring a softer approach than her own directness allowed. Why are you calling? I asked. Because I need to understand the evidence. How much is mine specifically? How much is me versus her? Blair. That conversation goes to your attorney. Not me. I don't have one yet. Get one today. Federal criminal defense, not the family estate lawyer. Someone who does this specifically. Do you understand the difference between a subject and a target in federal terminology? No. Your letter says subject. Not the same as target. The distinction matters significantly. Call someone today. Silence. Then, I didn't know it was this. Mother said it was a temporary management adjustment. A rebalancing. She said outside advisors had approved the structure. I said nothing. I'm not saying that excuses it. I know what the letter says. I'm saying when I signed those documents I did not understand what I was authorizing. 15 years of forensic practice. I had seen every version of this conversation, the person claiming ignorance when evidence showed knowledge, the person claiming knowledge when cooperation served them, the person genuinely telling the truth about being deceived by someone more sophisticated. I had the transaction records. The authorization signatures. The timeline of what Blair had signed and when. I also had enough experience to know Victoria Vance was precisely the kind of person who ensured cosigners understood the minimum necessary and nothing more. Get the attorney today. Tell them everything, including what you just told me. Will it matter? Genuinely a question for your lawyer. A pause. Then quietly, is Dad going to be okay? No strategy. No positioning. Just the question. Julian has the highest outcome rates for this presentation in New England. That's not what I asked. I don't know, I said honestly. Julian will do everything that can be done. Okay. Not resigned. The sound of someone absorbing several things at once without collapsing. Blair. Get the lawyer. I will. She hung up. I looked at the Charles River. May light on the water, warmer than March, running clear. I thought about Blair at 35, signing documents inside a family structure that had always required alignment above comprehension. What it does to judgment when you grow up inside something like that. I did not absolve her. The record was the record. But I understood something about how a person ends up where Blair had ended up. Gerald Fitch called 4 days later. He had handled Vance family legal matters for 22 years. Compact, precise, the careful language of a man managing the gap between what wealthy clients wanted and what law permitted. I'm calling on behalf of Victoria Vance. I want to be transparent about that. I appreciate it. Victoria has asked me to communicate a proposal. She is not contacting you to interfere with the federal process. This is a family matter. A pause. There is a 2013 amendment to the Vance Family Legacy Trust containing a provision for reinstatement of a previously removed beneficiary. Victoria is prepared to activate that provision. Voluntarily. Effective immediately. She wants to reinstate me as a beneficiary, I said. Correct. In exchange for what? The pause was fractionally too long. She frames it as a gesture of family reconciliation, Fitch said carefully. A demonstration of good faith. Gerald. The particular flatness that ends careful language. What does she want? She is hoping a demonstrated act of reconciliation might be considered relevant context in the federal proceeding. There it was. My mother, facing a grand jury and a target letter, had decided that reinstating the daughter she disowned for marrying a black man might build a sympathetic narrative. Purchasing, with a document that cost her nothing immediate, the appearance of a reformed woman. Tell her no, I said. And tell her any further contact through intermediaries regarding the federal case will be reported to the U.S. Attorney as potential witness interference. I understand. I hung up. Added one note to the ledger. Asterisk May 19, 2024. 2:34 p.m. Fitch called on behalf of Victoria Vance. Proposed trust reinstatement in exchange for implicit federal influence. Declined. Documented, asterisk. Then I pulled up the 2013 amendment, copy in my historical backup files, and read it carefully for the first time. The reinstatement provision was there. But another clause stopped me. One I had scanned past years ago without registering its significance. The amendment restructured the trust's authorization protocols. It consolidated signing authority for transactions above $50,000 from a 3-person committee, including an outside financial advisor, to a 2-person structure. Trustee and 1 designated family member only. Dated October 2013. 14 months before I left. Reducing the oversight structure to exactly the 2-person framework Victoria and Blair had used to run 5 years of extractions. My mother had not improvised the embezzlement. She had engineered it. 6 years before the first extraction, she had quietly removed the independent oversight that would have flagged everything she later did. She built the mechanism before she used it. I forwarded the amendment to outside counsel with one line, asterisk this predates the extraction period by 6 years. Read clause 4.3, asterisk. Response in 11 minutes, asterisk sending to USAO tonight. This changes the premeditation analysis significantly, asterisk. 8 days until the surgery. May 28 arrived clear and cold. Julian left at 5:30 a.m. I arrived at MGH at 7:15. The surgical waiting area was a long quiet room with chairs along the walls, a window overlooking the Charles River. Nobody performs anything in a surgical waiting room. The waiting strips it all away. My mother was already there. Sitting near the window. Dark navy coat. No clutch. No posture performance. Sitting the way people sit when they think no one is watching, slightly forward, hands loose in her lap, looking at nothing. She looked small. I sat across the room. She heard me. Looked up. Our eyes met across 9 years, a conference table, every returned letter, every red ink stamp. Neither of us spoke. Not hostile. Not warm. Something more complicated, 2 people who had been on opposite sides of a long reckoning, in the same room for the first time in 9 years, waiting together for the same news. At 8:47 a.m. nurse confirmed the procedure had begun without complications. At 11:23 Julian came through the door in scrubs. Decompression complete, he said. Brainstem compression fully relieved. He came through without incident. A pause. He did well. My mother made a sound I had never heard from her before. Not words. Brief and unguarded, the sound of a woman who had been holding something enormous, and had just been told she could put it down. Thank you, she whispered. Of course, Julian said. He looked at me once, a brief private look carrying everything it needed to, and went back through the door. We sat another 40 minutes without speaking. A volunteer brought coffee. We sat with the cups warm in our hands, morning light moving across the floor between us. When the nurse came, my mother stood. Gathered her coat. 2 steps toward the door and stopped. Same as the conference room threshold 5 weeks ago. Not turning fully. Just enough. This time she didn't mention my father. She said, "I'm sorry, Anya." 3 words. No qualification. No strategic framing. Just the words, with the weight of something that had been a long time arriving. I looked at her profile. Silver chignon slightly less precise. Hands that had sealed 9 years of envelopes now still at her sides. I did not say it's okay. Because it wasn't entirely. And I was not going to perform a forgiveness I hadn't finished building. I said, "I know." She nodded once. Walked through the door. I sat back by the window. The Charles River bright in late morning light, moving clearly, without obstruction. I opened the black box ledger. Found the file labeled evidence that he tried, added 1 line below it. May 28, 2024. MGH neurosurgical waiting room. She said she was sorry. I said I know. File remains open, I put the phone in my pocket. Outside, the river kept moving. Somewhere in this building, my father was waking up.